Hey, this is Alex with SkyRC, coming to you today with a plane review. It's my first one, so please bear with me. We have the Blitzrcworks PAC-FA, also known as the T-50. Comes from bananahobby.com. It's a twin 50mm ducted fan jet. Comes with two 4300 kV motors, two 20 amp ESCs, and two, I think they're 9-gram servos, set up to run on the whole thing is set up to run on a 3-cell power system. You can run a 1800 to 2200 milliamp hour battery in here. And it comes as a kit, almost ready to fly and a ready to fly. This is the almost ready to fly version. I got it for Father's Day. I believe at the time it was around $100 to $110, so it seemed like a pretty good deal. Plus, I wanted to get into I wanted to try a twin ducted fan setup. So we'll just kind of talk about the plane, do a little overview, and then go into the flight characteristics and just what I think, because this plane took a little bit to work my way into this plane and learn its little quirks. So first thing I'll say is when you get in the box, you'll have the main fuselage piece as one piece. You'll have to attach the nose, the wings, vertical stabilizers, and horizontal stabilizers. It comes with landing gear, but I did not put it on because I belly land and hand launch all my planes. So, and if you get it from Banana Hobby, you'll also get the little flight stabilizer gyro setup they have. I did not put it on this plane, but it's kind of a nice thing to just kind of keep around. I don't really think this plane really needs it, but the one thing I'll say about the plane overall, the paint is very thin. The paint job actually looks really nice, but if you like the paint job, I highly suggest clear coating it or sealing it before you go, even for your first flight, because the paint will come off even just while you're putting it together. So everything's attached with magnets. All the hatches, you have a detachable nose cone, and even here while I was getting ready to do the video, I was going to mention the magnets are very strong, and a lot of times they'll end up pulling out of the foam. So I just now had another one pull out of the foam. I've had to re-glue several of these magnets, so that's something to watch out for, is these magnets coming out of the foam and having to re-glue them back in. And you can use epoxy, or I've been using hot glue. They'll both work. Or Gorilla Glue would also work. With the magnets being so strong, I ended up adding little tape tabs here for a couple of the hatches that would help get the hatches open and everything. If you don't do that, you're gonna start marring up and digging and gouging your foam from trying to dig your nails in here to pull these out, because like I said, the magnets are pretty strong. So to do the tape tab, you just kind of get a piece of tape, kind of wrap it on itself, and make a little grip surface right here. So the canopy is notched in the front, and you have a little kind of a roll bar right here, and then you can see my receiver kind of just hanging loose. I think it's designed for the battery to go in from the front, but I find that it was better to go in from the rear hatch. So the factory hatch is right here. I cut it out bigger because I intended to use this for putting the batteries in and out, so I needed it a little bit bigger. And then I put a tape hinge on the front. And then I added the Velcro. It does not come with a Velcro. And you can see here where I cut out, this is the part I cut out and added to the existing hatch, which can still come off. It's held on with its own little magnet. So you have the receiver and ESC wires. The ESCs sit here, just kind of hang loose. You have the two cheater holes for the ducted fan units. Now I made these a little bigger than they come out of the box, so I think I added 1/4 inch just to get a little more airflow in there. Don't have to do it. It does fly without that, but I think it flies a little better with the extra area here. Then we have our ducted fan units. You have 2mm connectors for your motor wires. And these do not come balanced. I highly suggest balancing them. They are quite noisy out of the box. I just did a dynamic balance on them, but you could get, if you can, I would recommend doing a static balance. Even after dynamically balancing them, they still are pretty noisy. I have noticed that the more I fly it though, it is starting to quiet down, so I'm not sure if the bearings are wearing in or what it is, but the whole setup is a little quieter each time I fly it. You have our servos here. They're driving 4 control surfaces. You have inboard mounted ailerons, which is a little bit different, but what's nice is that you have full flying stabs. Give you a lot of good pitch control. The roll is a little sluggish, but it's not terrible. So then, on the thing I want to talk about on the tail is that if you look closely, you can kind of see how the exhaust nozzles have a little bit of a kind of an upward angle here in the back, and you may have seen it before, but there's little plastic diverters here in the exhausts, and all this is designed to kind of deflect the exhaust upward. And we'll talk about what's going on there in a second, but the only other thing I was going to say is the center of gravity ends up being right here. There's a little circle right here imprinted into the mold of the foam, which I believe this is EPO foam. But that's where your center of gravity is going to end up being per the manual. It does come with a manual. So, flying this thing, there's not a whole lot of information on this plane, which is one reason, another reason I kind of wanted to tackle it, just to check it out, because it was kind of mixed reviews, which you could find. Banana Hobby has a video on this plane. I wouldn't really call it an advertisement video, but it does a nice job of giving an overview of the plane. So if you're interested in this plane, I suggest getting on there and watching. I think it's on YouTube. Watching their review of this plane. It gives a very good description of just the general plane, and it has a lot of flight video. If you go to Banana Hobby's website, I believe there are a couple reviews on this plane. There are a couple forums on RC groups, just some postings that kind of go over this plane. So I kind of used all that information to get it set up for its maiden flight. The only thing I could really gather is that you do need a little bit of reflex built in on the elevator. I think I started out with about 5 millimeters. When I went to go out for the maiden flight, I actually had a lot of trouble. It ended up nosing into the ground. And remember, I'm hand launching here. So if you're taking off from the landing gear, it might be a little better. But I'm hand launching, and I actually ended up nosing into the ground a couple times. I didn't break anything off, but I did snag my full flying stab because I was pulling a lot of up elevator at the time, and just snagged in the grass and didn't rip it off, but it bent it severely. I think it was this one. So it was a pretty easy repair because it's EPO foam. I just kind of bent it back, taped it, used a little bit of heat, and it was fine. I don't even think I needed any glue, but it took a few times to finally get it worked out. What I ended up doing is I had to actually max out the up trim on my radio to get this thing to, take off and go from a hand launch. And I find that it needs that same amount of up trim just to kind of cruise around and fly. So I think my first attempt I had like 5-6 millimeters, and the way I fly it right now today, it needs about 15 millimeters or so of up trim built in of reflex, which, like I said, is about the full amount of trim my radio had, thankfully, to fly properly. So it needs a lot more up trim than I thought. So I gave it a lot of up trim. Even then, after I went to go fly it, it still acted very nose heavy in the air, and it always kind of wanted to dive into the ground. And so even when I was flying, I was still pulling up a lot of elevator just to kind of fly it. And then when you went to go land, oddly enough, as soon as I cut the power, because I normally do dead stick landings, as soon as I cut the power to come in and land, it actually floated in very nicely. It didn't bob its nose up or anything, but it came real nice and level. It was very easy to land, very floaty. So I played around with the CG a little bit. I actually was still convinced it was just a nose, balance issue, that it was just nose heavy. So I started walking that CG back, and that's about the time that I cut that hatch bigger on the bottom, so I could actually put that battery further back more easily. Eventually, I got it. The center of gravity should be about here at that circle. I eventually moved it back almost 2 inches, and it was actually still flying, but I wasn't really. I kind of liked where it was going, but it still felt nose heavy to me. Eventually, when I got close to maybe 1.5 inches back from the recommended setting, I actually got it so tail heavy that I ended up crashing it. That's why it looks kind of banged up. You'll see a lot of, all the tape on the wing here is because I actually ended up stalling up, inverted. I stalled it, it went inverted, and then it flew into a tree upside down at a, kind of like a high alpha, angle. So I was lucky. I don't think anything actually broke off. Again, it is a pretty tough plane, but it did get a little banged up. And one reason that it flipped on its back, which is something I should mention, is that you kind of have a tunnel in here for the battery, and you have little ribs that are built into the foam. You'll see this on a lot of store-bought planes, is they have the little ribs that's kind of meant to sandwich your battery in place. But when you do that way, the battery ends up sitting actually kind of low. So because I did mine a different way, and I cut the hatch and I put the Velcro up high, so it ends up being deep in here and on the top surface, it actually made the plane less stable. So with it in a tail heavy condition, once it lost enough lift and it started coming over, the weight being, I think, on top a little bit higher actually helped it flip over on its back. And no matter what I did, I actually I didn't have the airspeed to be able to flip it back over. So that is one negative of doing the battery the way I'm doing it now. But if you have it balanced properly, it shouldn't be a problem. Remember, I had it very tail heavy when I had that flipping over problem. So anyway, I put it away for a while. I started thinking about it, looking at it, doing a little bit more research, and then I realized, and I think I figured out what the issue is with this plane. Because it really is a fantastic plane. It's probably it's getting up close to one of my favorite ones to just fly and cruise around with. So if you look at this plane, you look at some stock photos of an actual T-50, or if you look at I think the LX models that Banana Hobby sells, they sell a bigger version of this. The LX model version is more scale looking than this one is. One key factor, or one key aspect that this one is less scale than the real one, is this front area right here. What's happening is on this model, on the Blitzrcworks version, this has kind of a downward angle here in the front, and I think what's happening is it's an aerodynamic issue. So you're getting kind of almost like a down canard kind of effect. So the faster you go, the more the air is actually trying to push the nose down. And that would explain what the behavior I was seeing when I was flying it, and it also explains why they put this on here. So it's actually kind of ironic that, I've never seen a setup like this before, where they're doing these little diverters to kind of deflect the jet exhaust up. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to push the tail down so that it won't seem like, so the nose won't just be diving into the ground. They're trying to push the tail down, but it's overcoming a problem that should never have existed in the first place. If this was more level, I believe you wouldn't have that issue. Anytime you have a plane with a lot of area in front of the center of gravity, it can tend to have pitch issues because this area, starts at different speeds. Will start, causing lift, losing lift, and especially if you have an angle like this down, it can wreak some havoc on your flight performance. But I found a way to get around it. First of all, if you run the up trim, that helps out a lot because that'll naturally kind of keep the tail down. And then the main thing is getting the center of gravity just right. What I have found is that the best place for the center of gravity is actually just a hair back from the recommended position. So I would actually be on the back edge, right on the back edge of that circle, as opposed to in the center of it. If you're in that area, with that amount of up trim, with a 15 millimeter or so of up trim or a reflex, it actually flies really nicely. Now, it is still a little quirky. I mean, as the speed and your throttle position change, things are going to be happening a little more than some jets. I mean, I've done a lot of jets. Most of the ones I fly really aren't that pitch sensitive or throttle sensitive, unless there's some problem. This one, you're kind of, you're trying to overcome some of the aerodynamic issues if you get the balance just right and you have your trim set up right, it just about does it. I mean, it really, I flew it this morning even, and it flew like a regular plane. It's actually become very hands-off. You have to know that if you want to get the tightest loop or the certain maneuvers that you want to try, you'll have to play around with the throttle position and speeds a little bit. But a lot of planes will have that aspect to them. So overall, yeah, I think this is actually a really, really good plane. I actually really highly recommend it. Provided you have the up trim, the reflex in the back, and the center of gravity just slightly aft, like I mentioned, from the stock position, it flies really, really nicely. I would just go with the recommended throws. I think the manual has the recommended throws just to start out with, and then you can always adjust them from there. But it will do a real nice loop. The power from the twin 50s and the acceleration, even with a 3-cell, is actually very good. It's I'm tempted to try a 4-cell with it, but I don't think it needs it. It would just kind of be a fun thing to try. The only issue with going 4-cell, besides running the heavier battery and everything else, is that I don't know if these fan blades are quite well balanced enough that I feel comfortable running them at the higher voltage. But it could be a fun little experiment to try. These fan units are very cheap to replace if you do happen to blow one. But with a 3-cell setup, I run 2200s only because that's one reason I got the plane also, is because I have plenty of 22s. I don't have many 18s, so with a lighter battery, it'd probably be even more fun. It has probably just about 1-to-1 power to weight ratio. So, like I said, I think I said before, the roll rate isn't great with these inboard mounted ailerons, so just be ready for that. And when you come into land, be careful with that pitch control, because like I said, you can snag those full flying stabs pretty easily. But what's nice is if you set it up like I mentioned, when you come into land, if you can land dead stick, which I recommend because it'll do it, it'll actually flare up as you take the power off and it slows down. It'll flare up just a touch, and you basically are just kind of gently guiding it in. I mean, it almost lands itself. I will also say that because of the large wing area, you can probably get away with adding some more servos on here. It may not be a bad idea to add some rudder servos, or if you really are feeling ambitious, I kind of like the idea of maybe putting a twin thrust vectoring setup on here, because you could get some 50mm nozzles, and I think that would really make this plane rock. Especially if you can run with a lighter battery, you're going to get about a solid 5-6 minutes, I would say, on the 2200. 1800 is obviously going to be probably more in the 4 to 5 range, but and with a 4-cell, I haven't measured the amperage, but with a 3-cell, with my fresh 2200 3-cell, I believe I'm pulling in the neighborhood of 42 amps peak, and then it drops down from there. I mean, with that first gunning of the throttle, so. I think it settles in probably in the high 30s, which is about right for these fans. I think they're sucking a little more power in this plane than they do in some of my other 50mm planes, probably because of the ducting and everything. But overall, very nice flyer. It'll do all your maneuvers. It does high alpha a little better than I thought it would. You don't have the rudders, so you're not going to do 3D performance flying or anything like that, but for sport flying, it does great inverted, because I think these little surfaces here actually act as a little bit of extra lift when you're inverted. So it's very comfortable inverted, especially if you do like I did and have your battery on top inside there, because then when you go upside down, now that battery is hanging low and it actually kind of stabilizes it. So the only problem with inverted on this plane is the pattern on the top and the bottom are basically the same. So if you're going to fly inverted, and I've stopped doing it because of this, put something for orientation, bright colored tape or something to help differentiate the two sides. But aside from that, it's a really nice plane, and for the price, for around $100, I can't fault it too much, because it really does very well. And worst case, you can always pick up another kit if you do happen to bang it up, but it does repair very nicely. And then, yeah, I definitely give it 2 thumbs up. It just make sure you set it up like I said, because it is a little underwhelming with the stock setup, and when you're sitting there having to constantly keep it from going into the ground, it takes away some of the fun. So anyway, that's all I have. So if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please put them down below, and please subscribe. You can always use more input. So with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks.